Welcome to My Country, My America, and U.S. American Stories. The views and opinions expressed are ex-certive LLCs and are for entertainment enjoyment only. Source material used to make this podcast was in part from Bill Federer's American Minute. Please see the show notes for more details on the source materials used for this podcast. Now let's listen to a deep dive talking about just one of the many amazing topics in My Country, My America, and U.S. American Stories. Let's go.
All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive on Betsy Ross.
Okay, sounds good.
And we're using a YouTube video as our main source.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, might seem a little unconventional.
Yeah.
But, hey, sometimes those nuggets of history, they pop up in the most unexpected places.
Right, absolutely.
So everybody knows the basic story, Betsy Ross and the first American flag.
Yeah, I mean, who hasn't heard that story?
Exactly. But today we're going to try to dig a little deeper, see if we can get a fuller picture of her life. Really try to understand who she was as a person, beyond the flag. Because I think it's important to remember that these figures from history, they were real people. They had real lives, families, hopes, dreams.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, they weren't just, names in a textbook.
Right, right.
And I think that's one of the things that's so fascinating about Betsy Ross, how her story intersects with some of the most important events in early American history.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, her life really gives us a glimpse into what it was like for everyday people during the Revolution. All the challenges they faced, the sacrifices they made.
Yeah, and especially for women. I mean, their roles during that time were so crucial.
Absolutely. And, speaking of, kind of the context of her life, she came from a huge family, like huge.
Oh, yeah.
She was the 8th of 17 children.
Wow. 17? I mean, can you imagine?
Can you imagine that household? I can't even fathom, like 17 kids running around. Like that must have been, it must have been chaotic. What do you think that tells us about family life back then?
Well, I mean, it certainly says a lot about how different things were back then, right? I mean, large families were actually pretty common, especially in like artisan and working class families like Betsy's.
Yeah.
Children were often seen as kind of an asset, contributing to the family economy from a young age.
Wow. So really different from today. And, one of the things that really struck me about Betsy Ross, reading about her, was her independent spirit. I mean, she was raised Quaker, and they traditionally discouraged, like, marrying outside the faith.
Right.
But she fell head over heels for this guy, John Ross, who was the son of an Episcopal rector.
Right.
And they eloped. I mean, can you imagine the scandal?
Yeah. I mean, that definitely would have raised some eyebrows.
To say the least.
Especially back then. I mean, it makes you wonder, what kind of conversations were happening within families and communities about religious tolerance and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, remember, this was a time of, really significant religious and social change. The Great Awakening had just happened, which sparked all this new religious fervor.
Yeah.
And challenging traditional authority. So it's possible that Betsy's decision to elope kind of reflected these broader shifts in thinking.
That's fascinating. And it's like it gets even more interesting when you realize that John Ross wasn't just any, rector's son.
No.
He was also the nephew of George Ross, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence.
Wow.
Talk about a family connection.
That's incredible.
Right. I mean, so, this really shows just how interconnected those early American families were. Particularly among those who were involved in the Revolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, these weren't just like abstract figures in a history book. They were real people, complex family ties, personal connections.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that sometimes.
It really is. And it gets even more interesting because Betsy and John were part of the congregation at Christ Church in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
The same church where Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, and Franklin worshipped. Can you imagine?
Wow. That's some company.
Right. I mean, sitting there in the pews listening to the same sermons.
Yeah. And who knows, maybe even rubbing elbows with them after the service.
Yeah. I mean, it's mind-blowing to think about. And it makes you wonder, what kind of sermons were being preached there? How might those gatherings have influenced Betsy's views on the Revolution?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's easy to imagine how those sermons and just the general discussions within the church could have fostered this sense of patriotism and support for independence. I mean, these were spaces where people not only expressed their faith, but also, engaged in political debate and community building.
Right.
So for Betsy, being in that environment might have really solidified her commitment to the cause.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah.
But sadly, their time together was cut short. John died tragically while guarding a munitions depot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's a stark reminder that the revolution wasn't just about, grand ideas and political debates. It had a very real human cost.
Absolutely. And that cost was often borne by, ordinary people like John Ross. I mean, their sacrifices are often overlooked in the grand narrative of history, but they were absolutely essential to the success of the revolution.
They really were.
Mm.
And then came Betsy's second marriage to Joseph Ashburn.
Okay.
And they married at Old Swedes Church, another historic landmark.
Yeah.
This was right in the thick of the revolution, so life must have been incredibly challenging.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the war brought immense hardship to many, especially women.
Absolutely.
They had to deal with shortages of food and supplies, the constant threat of violence, and of course, the emotional toll of having loved ones away fighting, or worse.
Yeah, I mean, just the constant worry.
Exactly.
And Betsy experienced that hardship firsthand. I mean, British soldiers were quartered in her home.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine the tension, the fear?
It must have been terrifying.
Yeah. And then Joseph sailed to the West Indies for war supplies, but was captured.
Oh, no.
And died in a British prison.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. And I mean, it's stories like this that really highlight the resilience of women like Betsy.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, they not only had to manage households and businesses, but also navigate the dangers and uncertainties of war.
Yeah, with remarkable strength and adaptability.
And they were incredible. And then comes another twist in the story. A fellow prisoner, John Claypool, brought news of Joseph's death back to Betsy.
Okay.
And they later married.
Wow. I mean, it's really a testament to Betsy's ability to find love and support, even in the face of repeated loss.
Yeah. And it also kind of underscores the importance of community and human connection during times of crisis.
Definitely.
I mean, people needed each other to survive. And she went on to have 5 children with John Claypool. So 3 husbands, 5 kids, and living through the American Revolution.
I mean, talk about a life filled with both joy and heartbreak.
It's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, Betsy Ross's story, beyond the legend of the flag, reminds us that history is made not only by, famous leaders, but also by everyday individuals, navigating extraordinary circumstances.
Absolutely. I mean, she was a businesswoman, a wife, a mother, and a witness to history.
Yeah. And it really challenges us to think about the untold stories of countless other women who contributed to the revolution in their own ways.
Yeah, I mean, I bet there are so many stories out there that we just don't know.
Oh, I'm sure of it.
And it really kind of makes me wonder, what fascinating stories are hidden in our own family histories. I mean, maybe it's time for all of us to do a little digging.
Yeah, you never know what you might find.
Exactly. You never know.